Welcome to the Under 8 podcast, a daily, 3 times per week college basketball show brought to you in under 8 minutes. At the time of recording, it is Monday, March 18th, 11:02 a.m. My name is Josh Mullenix. On today's pod, the madness is here. The brackets are here. We're talking predictions, Cinderellas, and Final Fours. It's all right now on the Under 8 podcast. Josh Doering is here with me. Bold predictions, Cinderella, Final Fours. Of course, a gajillion things to break down here, Josh, but we will start with bold predictions based on what you've now seen, which is the field of 68 on both the men's and women's side.
Yeah, here we go. All right, so you want me to just kick it off here?
Hit me.
Men's side. I'm curious how bold you think this is. Top 8 seeds, all of them make the Sweet 16.
So everybody. So we're talking that's UConn, Iowa State, Houston, Marquette, Purdue, Tennessee, and Arizona, North Carolina.
That's correct. This is the theme for me on the men's side this season. I'm looking at this, and I just really feel like these 8 teams are much better relative to everybody else than most seasons. Usually I come in with at least a team or two that's a lower seed that I feel like that's at least a Sweet 16 team. That's an Elite 8 team where not that I get them all right, but I want to predict upsets. Last year, one of those teams was Creighton. I don't have them. This is not going to happen because it never happens this way, but that's my bold prediction is that we get chalk for the top 8 teams here, and they all comprise half of the Sweet 16.
You know, part of me is like, yeah, I think you might be right. The other part of me is that I think 7 of the top 8 seeds I can talk myself out of. 7 of them. Because and I won't get deep into it because that would kind of, spill the beans on almost on a majority of what I have here, but I can point to one thing for all 8 of those teams except UConn and say that is the one thing I will be scared about every time they take the court, apart from maybe against the 16 or 15 seed that they play in the first round. I think the rationale is pretty spot on. I think you're right. That those 8 teams that drop from the 2 seed to the 3 seed, like for example, in the East, like the 2 is Iowa State and the 3 is Illinois. I mean, do we think Illinois and Marquette, and Iowa State are in the same stratosphere? I mean, maybe there are people that do, but I would consider that that's a pretty significant jump. I would say the same about Marquette and Kentucky. And I would say,
assuming Marquette is healthy, that's the only
hesitation. Sure. Well, that's part of the reason that I can talk myself out of Marquette because I don't know how healthy Tyler Kolek is.
Right.
Maybe there's an argument that the Creighton to Tennessee drop in the Midwest is not that big of a drop.
That's the one that I looked at. Yep, absolutely.
But Arizona to Baylor is, I don't think, unless Baylor just shoots the lights out for 2 weeks, like I'm not super scared of Baylor either. So I think you're right, but there are also a lot of those teams there that I'm like, yeah, but it feels like there might be. If you told me they lost in the second round, I wouldn't be totally stunned for a lot of those top 8 teams. But I think what you said is accurate at the same time.
And just looking at who they would hypothetically play too. I mean, Florida Atlantic, I would consider Florida Atlantic
is not very good. Straight up.
Not had a great season, and they're not beating UConn. If it was somebody else, I might consider that matchup. The 7s don't particularly inspire me. So I had a hard time talking myself into any of them losing. I am with you, though. It's not that I think they're all flawless. I just don't see a lot of danger until we get to the Sweet 16.
My bold prediction on the men's side is that a sub 4 a sub top 4 seed will represent the West in the Final Four. So that means that
Okay.
North Carolina, Arizona, Baylor, and Alabama, nobody out of that group of 4 will make it to the Final Four. And here's my part of my rationale is that I'm so uninspired by Baylor and Alabama. Like I'm not
Yep.
interested in picking 2 teams that are going to go to the Final Four that don't play defense
Mhm.
and need to shoot the 3 really well to get there. I just am never going to be comfortable with that. And on the Arizona and UNC side, it's a little bit like either of them could get to the Final Four. Absolutely. But both of them are probably them getting to the Final Four is probably most predicated on their high volume guards being really efficient. Like if RJ Davis is bad for a game in the second weekend, North Carolina's probably going to be under some pressure.
Mm.
And if RJ and more so Arizona, if Caleb
Yeah.
Love is a 4 of 16 game in the second weekend, or even against Dayton in the second round, which Dayton
Or
is the 7 seed that is like, okay, that is one of those 7 seeds that I wouldn't be super thrilled about playing in the second round. But
or if
it's
Kyle, can I add one more thing to that too? If Kylan Boswell doesn't play well, we've been
sure.
talking about this all season. If he's bad, they just almost automatically lose. Yeah,
Sure. Yes,
100%.
absolutely. So I think, and I also think that like St. Mary's, I think is good. I mean, I think Grand Canyon is not a fun proposition. Clemson, Dayton. I don't really want to go all the way down to Mississippi State and Michigan State, but like those are 2 high major teams at the 8 and 9 spot. Um, this has more to do with I think the volatility of the 2 most important guys on Arizona and UNC's team, coupled with the fact that I'm uninspired completely by Baylor and Alabama just because of their statistical profile and them not being the type of teams I'd want to hang my hat on when it comes to March.
I am not at all surprised that that's the conclusion you came to looking at those top 4 seeds.
Mm. We'll see and it could like Alabama and Baylor could both shoot the lights out and go to the Sweet 16, and North Carolina could cruise through a middling high major team in the round of 32, and Arizona could just have really excellent backcourt play. And if that happens, they're probably not losing either. And we could get chalked. That could happen too. But I wouldn't be surprised if we have a couple teams in the Sweet 16 there. That is a bit surprising.
Shall we go to the women's side?
Let's do it. What you got?
Make this pretty quick. We have 0 number 1 seeds coming out of the Portland regions.
Out of the Portland region, so the bottom
Yep.
2, right? Sure.
Yeah, so 3. So this is USC and Texas.
Hmm.
I'm looking at this. To me, Stanford is just better than Texas.
Sure.
So that right there, I like the chances of somebody outside of Texas coming out of that bracket.
Mhm.
And then you've got Ohio State and you've got UConn in USC's region.
Yeah, definitely.
USC is the best team in this region after what they've done in the Pac-12 this season. That's also a team led by a freshman guard who's never done this before, as opposed to Gino Auriemma and an Ohio State team that's been really, really good and, consistently gets to second, third rounds of NCAA tournaments, even if they don't necessarily have a team quite like this every single season. They're a very good program that have had a lot of, long-term consistent success.
Sure.
So it's a combination of, and Virginia Tech is in there too. If Virginia Tech is healthy, they're incredibly dangerous as well. So it's a combination of these are the 2 ones that I trust the least. And also the other teams I would be looking at to kind of spoil the party. A lot of them are in these regions as well. So there's my bold prediction is that we have at most 2 number 1 seeds and neither of them come from the Portland regions.
I'm going to piggyback on that. Take it one step further and say we will get 1 number 1 seed in the Final Four.
Okay.
It is consistent enough that Iowa at least has to sweat when Caitlin isn't awesome.
Yep.
Now, granted, she could be awesome, not be awesome for a half like we saw in the Big Ten tournament, and then have 30 in the second half, and they kind of cruise. Like that could also happen. But I've seen it enough times this season that I am willing to slide it into my bold predictions category. Not necessarily all the way to an official prediction, but my bold prediction is that South Carolina will be the only number 1 seed in the final.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that. You've got UCLA and LSU, which at least we know can pose problems to Iowa. I think you and I are both kind of out on LSU at this point, but on the right night, they absolutely can take down anybody as they showed last season.
That is interesting, though, that we're going to get that. In theory, we're going to get that matchup in the Sweet 16, Elite 8?
Elite 8, if they beat
Elite
UCLA.
8? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I will say the one thing that would have really made, I considered doing something similar to that if Notre Dame was not in South Carolina's bracket. This is the single thing I'm saddest about because I want to see Hannah Hidalgo go bonkers. I really think if they can hold up with all of their inability to have lots of players at this point because they're so banged up, she is the kind of player that can get you. And I mean, Juju Watkins for USC is the same way, and I just said they're going to lose. But I wanted to see Hannah Hidalgo have a chance to do this against somebody other than South Carolina, because if they were the 2 instead of UCLA, I would be totally on board with this. But I am with you. That's why we put it in bold predictions, and we're thinking along the same lines.
There you go. Cinderellas. Let's start with the women. Who's your Cinderella on the women's side?
I did kind of a deep dive here. Are you ready for this?
Hit me.
I have selected Chattanooga.
Okay. He has selected Chattanooga. 14
seed, Portland 4 region, playing NC State. My logic is pretty simple. They're tied for 9th in the country in 3-point percentage. So the threes go in, and if the threes go in, you have a pretty good chance of being success. And Jade again is averaging almost 20 points a game. You've got a lead scorer that can be the best player on the floor. That's about as far as I went with it. But if you're looking for a team that kind of fits the bill of being able to overachieve and being able to make a game more competitive than it should be from the 3-point line with a bucket getter who can be that go-to scorer, Chattanooga fits that description. So there you go.
I like it. When in doubt, when it comes to Cinderellas, you go to the 12 line. And that's what I did. I went to the 12 line where I found one Florida Gulf Coast 29-4. They haven't lost, Josh, since December 10th was the last time that FGCU lost. Just absolutely ran through the ASUN. Just ran through it. Love it. It ran through it and didn't get particularly close to not running through it at any point in conference play. They have a win over North Carolina in non-conference. They played USC relatively close way back at the beginning of the season. It was a 15-point loss on the road, and it was really like one quarter that did them in. So it was a relatively close game, a 67-51 loss. But this is a team that has been the 12 seed before last year and took down a 5 seed. I believe it was. I'm blanking. I can't remember who they beat last year, but they are in that 12-5 slot again. The road will be tough. If they win that game, they get Indiana, a team that has a high ceiling, but definitely not quite as good as they were a year ago. But the Eagles are my pick to make a run.
All right, there you go.
On the men's side, what you got?
Been on this team all season. I don't think anybody had this laid out as well for them as New Mexico.
All right.
They're rolling right now. I'm not scared of Clemson, especially when you have the size to guard PJ Hall. And then you get Baylor, and I'm with you on Baylor that maybe you just picked the wrong day to face Baylor and they hit a bunch of threes and that's your season.
That could happen. That could happen.
Or you pick the right day to face Baylor and the threes don't fall and they don't defend. And the fact that you have your 3 leading scorers who are all guards, Jalen House, Jamal Mashburn Jr., Donovan Dent. This is the kind of team that can go play with Baylor's guards.
Mm.
And I know they weren't particularly great in Mountain West play, but there's just something about this team. I just love their makeup, and I see a path to the Sweet 16 that is not all that daunting. So here we go, New Mexico Lobos.
Would you have picked them before they won the Mountain West? Now we
I would
learned
have,
yesterday. We learned yesterday that they wouldn't have made the tournament if they didn't win the Mountain West, which was
yeah,
tough.
I would have considered picking them to. Yes, I would have considered it. Would I have been as confident? No.
Sure. I don't hate that. I don't hate that at all. I think New Mexico, in a lot of ways, fits that bill. I'm going, and I've mentioned them once already in the pod. I'm going Grand Canyon for two very simple reasons. High major quality coach, and Bryce Drew. Heard that bloodline's pretty good at coaching basketball teams. And they have an NBA level talent leading their charge, and Tyon Grant Foster. That is an NBA adjacent, even if you're not willing to go all the way to NBA talent. It is an NBA adjacent, once upon a time, like considered that unanimously kind of guy that's had a weird and up and down college career, but has been excellent this year. 19.8 points per game, 6'7" guy that, any high major defense is gonna need some assistance guarding. Now, maybe St. Mary's and their defense is exactly the type of team to shut down Grand Canyon and say sayonara, and that'll be the end of it. But if they get rolling, I think they have the coaching and the best player on the floor type guy at the top of their roster that could make a run to the Sweet 16. And this is also, this is that in terms of which 12 seed has the best chance to all of a sudden end up playing a 9 or an 8 seed in the Sweet 16. When picking between Purdue, North Carolina, UConn, and Houston to the point of the Sweet 16. Now, if we want to go all the way to Elite Eight, maybe that answer is different. We've talked about the Houston kind of ceiling they seem to hit at some point in almost every tournament. But if I had to pick between those four teams, Purdue, jokes aside, North Carolina is probably the team that I'm picking.
I agree.
So that's part of it as well. That there's a world in which Grand Canyon gets through St. Mary's, and then Alabama doesn't shoot it super well in the second round, or Charleston outshoots. I mean, Alabama and Charleston could put up a 250 points in regulation.
That is going to be the most entertaining game of the first round. Absolutely.
Like the best thing that could happen is that game is like 97-94 with like 2.5 minutes left. Like that would be sick. And if nothing else, North Carolina has to take on one high major opponent in the round of 32. I'm not inspired by either of those high major teams, but it's a high major team. And one of those teams was once upon a time a top 5 team in preseason. So that's part of it as well. But I think Bryce Drew and company could make some noise.
At some point, they've got to do this, right? Well, we're to the point with Grand Canyon. I know they haven't made it that many times, but Bryce Drew has them to a point where they're making it fairly consistently, and they are always a 12, a 13, 14. They're always one of the better automatic qualifiers that gets in because they play people. They have really, really good seasons. They're always dangerous. They're one of those teams that I always look at and go, I can see them pulling an upset. They are better than you think if you don't pay close attention to the sport. And it hasn't happened yet, but it's just a matter of time.
This is also the first time. Last year, they were a 14 seed and played Gonzaga. The last time before that they were in the tournament was 2021, where they played Iowa as a 15 seed. So this is the first time. This is the first time. And I didn't go back any further.
I believe that was their first appearance ever.
So they were a 15 seed that year. So this is the first year that they're in a position that, the 12 versus 5 stigma aside, this is, I think, one of the first times that, like, just on paper, you can talk yourself into them rather than just talking yourself into the madness of March.
Yeah. I I apologize. I thought they were a 13 and a 14 the other two previous times. So yeah, continuing to get better and better and improving their seed lines. Right. This is the best opportunity they've had so far. Best team Bryce Drew has had so far, for sure.
Final fours, shall we?
Well, let's do it.
We'll go region by region on the men's side, and then we'll go region by region on the women's side, and we'll start in the top left corner, go across, and then go across the bottom. So in the East, on the men's side, who will represent the East in Phoenix?
Iowa State Cyclones.
See, I knew you were going to do this. I knew you were going to do this. And
This is
and I'm not sure I have any rebuttal other than the fact that UConn is the number 1 seed in their in their region. But I know you, and I knew you were going to do this.
partially this is what they just did to Houston.
Sure, that can't exactly be written off. I agree.
Right, and part of this is I just don't care. Because to me, coming into the tournament, there is no disputing that UConn is the best team in the country. That will not change, regardless of what happens in this tournament. Over the entire season, they were the best team in the country, which was not the case last season. And as a result, not specifically because of that, but I just have a very hard time believing they're going to win 12 consecutive. And if you want to throw the Big East tournament in there, even more than that, single elimination games. And you know this about me, I fundamentally have a hard time picking a team to repeat as champions.
Sure.
And so that's where ultimately I was looking at this and said, where do I think they're going to fall? Because I'm not picking them to win the championship. And I look at that matchup. I look at what Iowa State's done against Houston. And Iowa State's ability to guard all the different threats that UConn has on the perimeter, their ability to guard Donovan Clingan. On the right night, they score enough points. And I don't look at this matchup and feel terror or feel like this is a horrible situation for Iowa State. So I've got the Cyclones taking down the Huskies to get to the Final Four.
I'm going to take all the things you said about UConn and use that as a reason that they're going to go to the Final Four.
Sure.
I'm going to take the best team with the best roster, with the best starting 5, with the coach that has done it, and just stop short of using which is a legitimate one, but I'm going to stop short of they did it last year, so they're probably not going to do it this year. I'm going to stop short of that and put UConn in the Final Four out of the East region. Going across to the South, that's Houston, number 1, Marquette, number 2, Kentucky, 3, Duke, 4 at the top of the seed lines. Who's going to represent that region in the Final Four?
Kentucky Wildcats.
Dude, I can't believe you did that. Okay. All right.
Here's my logic. I feel very, very confident.
They're going to lose to Greg Campy in the first round. You just disrespected Greg Campy, and now they're going to lose to him in the first round.
If that's what it takes for Greg Campy to win that game, that's fine by me.
Sure.
I feel very confident Houston's going to the Elite Eight. I'm going to do the opposite to what I did last season, where I was 100% sure that Duke was going to beat Tennessee, and say I'm 100% sure that the physical, imposing Houston Cougars are going to beat Duke. Sure. That is the one team I want no part of if I'm Duke. We've talked about it all season. They really have a tough time with physicality. That is the definition of Houston basketball.
Sure.
So I've got Houston in the Elite Eight. And, Marquette with Kolik's injury and those question marks, I don't feel great about that. I don't think Florida's going to put together. I could see Florida getting to the Sweet 16. They're the most dangerous of those 7 seeds for me. I don't see them getting much farther than that. So now you're looking, and Kentucky is assuming that Marquette doesn't look like early season Marquette at full strength, and Kolik is, playing out of his mind. Kentucky's the best team in that side of the bracket. And Kentucky is the kind of team that you don't want to play if you're Houston, because sometimes they're just going to score a bunch of points and it doesn't matter what you do defensively. So as much as I like the matchups for Houston to get to the Elite Eight, I don't like that matchup in the Elite Eight, so I've got Kentucky.
They're not going to play Kentucky in the Elite Eight because Kentucky's not going to make it that far because Kentucky doesn't play enough defense to make it that far.
I'm not surprised by this.
Houston to the Final Four because if Tyler Kolek was healthy, it's Marquette. I don't know how healthy Tyler Kolek is. There's part of me that just thinks that if he really was in a spot where he's going to be ready to go on Thursday, that he'd probably be ready to go to play UConn in a Big East championship game. I can see either side of that coin. Like, what's the point? It doesn't matter. But the other side of the coin could be, putting that team in that high pressure situation to at least get some run in a single elimination game with the full team. Like, I could see either side of that coin as to why you would or would not play Tyler Kolek. But the point being is that if he really wasn't ready for Sunday, how ready is he for Thursday? Not that I think that will result in Marquette losing in the first round necessarily, but if Marquette was like kind of hitting on all cylinders from a health perspective, then that's the type of talent that Houston runs into. And that kind of like hypothetical ceiling that we talked about when it comes to Houston. It's no secret that I'm not a fan of Kentucky. I'm not super inspired by Duke. I think you're right. If those two teams play in the Sweet 16, that's a Houston team that Duke just doesn't want to see. And then I kind of go down the line. Wisconsin, I'm uninspired by. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost to James Madison in the first round.
James Madison winning. Yep.
Texas Tech has had a great season, but there's a very real ceiling for them. I do think Florida is interesting. That was the 7th seed that I was like, oh, Florida is a 7th seed. But kind of all of those things together, I've gone chalk so far, but it's UConn, the best team in the country, and Houston, a team that when I look at the rest of the South, there are a lot of good teams here, but for one reason or another, not a team that super scares me from a Houston perspective.
Yeah, I really wanted to pick Marquette. I did. And if Kolek was close to being 100%, he would have played with a Big East championship on the line.
You'd have to think, right?
Yeah, right. Obviously, you've got bigger goals. You're trying to get him healthy for this tournament. But even if he plays, he's not at 100%. Yeah. Because if he was that close, I firmly believe he would have played in the Big East tournament. Because those are not just games. Those games matter. So
now maybe he has 20-9 in the opening round and looks healthy, and I'm completely wrong. And then I'll be sad that I didn't pick Marquette because if he's completely healthy, then I know what Marquette's about. But I'll see it first.
Yeah. And he does seem to be very good coming off of injuries for whatever reason.
Whatever, right? Yeah, bum ankle.
Right.
What was that? 35 or whatever out Illinois, right?
Yeah. So we'll see. That was my hurdle though. I can't pick them to come out of this region without seeing what he looks like and knowing if he's actually playing from the beginning.
Fair. Let's go to the bottom left corner. That's the West. That is number 1 seed North Carolina, number 2 Arizona, number 3 Baylor, 4 Alabama. Who comes out of this side?
You're picking all the chaos. I've got the Tar Heels.
Sure.
For a lot of the reasons you've already mentioned, I don't have a lot of faith in Arizona. I don't have a lot of faith in Baylor. I don't have a lot of faith in Alabama. All of a sudden, we're running out of teams that can beat North Carolina. I still really like the formula of this North Carolina team. Yes, it can be somewhat inconsistent, but they've got the guard. They've got a plan B in Armando Bacot. Defensively, they've been generally very good. I really like the makeup of this team, and there's nobody that makes me really consider whether they can do this. So, Tar Heels, Final Four.
Tar Heels, Final Four. It's a bold prediction for a reason. I'm plenty convinced by UNC. The bold prediction comes from how I'm not completely sold on seeds 2 through 4. But if UNC takes care of business, I think they're the best team pretty clearly, and which I guess is the way that being a 1 seed is supposed to work. But For all the reasons you said, at the end of the day, would feel like that would be an incorrect thing to pick, would be to pick somebody other than UNC. But we'll see.
Final
Last but not
region.
least, which one are we missing? The Midwest? Is
Yeah.
that right? In the Midwest, the Purdue Boilermakers. Tennessee doesn't get St. Peter's. I mean, Purdue doesn't get St. Peter's. Tennessee gets St. Peter's. The best thing that could happen for Purdue in the first 2 days of the NCAA tournament is that Tennessee takes out St. Peter's in the round of 64. The 3 seed, Creighton 4, Kansas 5, Gonzaga. What say you about the Midwest?
Boilermakers.
Boilermakers.
If Tennessee wasn't the 2 in this particular region, I'd be really if they switch with Marquette, I would have Tennessee going to the Final Four probably. And I've been a little bit scarred. I find it interesting that Creighton and Tennessee are both in the same region here and are on track to play each other.
Yeah.
Because those are the 2 teams that I really want to be all in on. And then they had absolute clunkers in their conference tournaments. And it's happened almost one too many times for me at this point. And I also just firmly believe in Purdue. So, and we saw what happened when Tennessee played Purdue the first time. I like that matchup for Purdue. I've got the Fighting Matt Painters.
I'm going to go Tennessee.
Okay.
Because if you're not supposed to put a bunch of stock into a team running through their conference tournament, you also aren't allowed to put a lot of stock in one stinker game. This is what Tennessee scored since their loss to Texas A&M on February 10th. 92, 88, 72, 86, 92, 81, 66 in a game they won, and then 81 in a game they lost to Kentucky. Then they scored 56 against Mississippi State. I know it was ugly. I'm not sitting here and going to try and argue that it wasn't ugly, but if I was down with with Tennessee to the Final Four on March 14th, before they played Mississippi State, I have to be in after March 15th when they lose to Mississippi State. And I've been on that for the last couple months that I think Tennessee can go to the Final Four. It breaks my heart to pick somebody other than Purdue. I'd love for it to come back and bite me in the butt because I just want Purdue to go to the Final Four. But I've been more convinced the last month or so in Tennessee, just personally, not in a, I think Tennessee is better than Purdue way. I don't even know if those things are allowed to exist at the same time, but I thought that Tennessee could go to the Final Four before what happened in the SEC tournament. So I'm gonna stick to that. I'd love to be able to put both Tennessee and Purdue in the Final Four.
Me too.
Part of this is I don't really want to come on here and pick 4 1 seeds to go to the Final Four, and I've already picked 3. But I'll go with the Volunteers, and I might look silly when they score 56 points in the Sweet 16.
You're absolutely right, though. For me, this is much more about them being in the same region as Purdue as it is my concerns about them.
Sure.
Is it entirely possible they have one clunker if they're going to win a national championship? Sure. Can they win that game with defense? Yes. The difference is they don't have to win 4 games with defense. They have to probably win 1.
Right.
They're more than capable of doing that. I'm right there with you. Yeah, you can't change your tune because of one bad game. I mean, look at how many of these other teams didn't win their conference tournament. And by the way, UConn didn't win their conference tournament last year either.
Mm-hmm.
So right there with you. I really wanted to pick Tennessee. Purdue was going to the Final Four for me. So Tennessee just kind of was the collateral damage.
That's fair. All right, women's side to wrap it up. Let's go top left, which is Albany 1, South Carolina the 1 seed, Notre Dame the 2, Indiana the 4, Oregon State the 3 seed. Who comes out of Albany 1?
South Carolina.
Do we need to discuss it further?
I don't feel like we do.
I've also got South Carolina representing Albany 1. Let's go across the way to Albany 2, as they say. across the way to Albany 2, where Iowa and Caitlin Clark are the number 1 seed, UCLA the 2, LSU the 3, Kansas State the 4. Who you got?
I'm going Iowa.
Okay.
The other 2 seeds scare me a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm out on LSU. There just isn't, of the teams that I was kind of looking at to say they might be able to take down Iowa, or I have a hard time picking Iowa to get past them. They just don't exist in this region. So I'm riding with Caitlin Clark and the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, I am too. I think you hit it on the head. If it's Ohio State,
Yep,
as their 2 seed, if it's Stanford as their 2 seed, then I think I get all the way to that bold prediction and turning it into a normal one. But it's UCLA, it's LSU, it's Kansas State. A team that at one point was number 2 in the country, but I think a 4 seed is more. I think a 4 seed is more indicative of who they are rather than being the number 2 team in the country at one point.
Relative to seed line, that's the team I would be most worried about if I was Iowa.
Sure. But I couldn't quite get there in this region with the draw that they got to pick somebody other than the best player in the country to get out of that region.
Yep.
Bottom left, aka Portland 4, Texas number 1, Stanford number 2, NC State number 3, Gonzaga number 4. Lots of good teams I just named, Josh. Who's going to represent them in Cleveland in the Final Four?
Stanford.
Sure.
At some point, one of these Pac-12 teams is going to make it.
You got to think, right?
This conference was so good this season. They've all beat up on each other. It's probably the reason why they didn't end up with 2 number 1 seeds is if they didn't have to play each other so much, we'd probably have 2 Pac-12 number 1 seeds.
Sure.
But only one of them could prevail in the end. Like I said before, I just think Stanford is better than Texas. Stanford also probably has the best player in this region in Cameron Brink. Obviously, your coach knows what she's doing.
You think so?
Maybe just a little bit. Has done this thing before. So
once or twice.
Just a couple times. Yeah, I got the Cardinal.
Me too. I will retweet everything there. To your point, they just happen to be the second best team in a conference that had 2 of the 4, 5 best teams in the country. I think Stanford representing Portland 4 in Cleveland. Last but not least, on this 38-minute edition of the Under 8 podcast, Portland 3, that's USC and Juju Watkins. That's number 2, Ohio State. That's number 3, UConn. Number 4, Virginia Tech. This region is sick, first of all.
Yeah. Yep.
Those top 4 seeds are sick.
We need those 4 in the Sweet 16.
I'm super into it. A gauntlet of a Sweet 16 would be absolutely incredible. Which team gets all the way there?
We're going to go throw a little bit of a curveball here. I'm going to go UConn.
UConn.
Yeah.
I did some poking around, and that's maybe not the popular pick. That wouldn't be the right thing to say, but I think it would be fair to say there's some momentum for the Huskies in Portland 3.
Now, the other challenge is they haven't exactly been playing teams of Ohio State, USC, and Virginia Tech's caliber here.
What are you
consistently?
What are you suggesting about the Big East right now?
It is not quite the
it's been a bad 4 days for the Big East. It's been a really bad 4 days for the Big East.
Yeah, tough all around. Yeah.
Yes.
So that is part of my hesitation is they're not coming out of the Pac-12 tournament like USC is.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's Gino Auriemma. I think he can get this team ready. I don't hate the Ohio State matchup for them. And this was the other one where I said, this USC team just hasn't done this before. Doesn't mean they can't. But when you're looking at the other teams that we're talking about here, just generally, right? An Iowa team that came so close last season. Obviously, Dawn Staley, obviously Tara Vanderveer.
Mhm.
You know, you can go down the list. What Ohio State's done this season, they've got a bunch of players who have been around the block. Virginia Tech, obviously, what they did last season. I just decided USC was the one seed that wasn't going to make it just because that happens sometimes. And
Mhm.
then I talked myself into UConn being the team to take that spot.
Sure. I'm going Ohio State.
Okay.
Going Ohio State. I think Cody McMahon might be the single most important player in the tournament in terms of maybe Hannah Stuelke, but from a what is this team when she's at her very best, and what is this team when she's not?
Yep.
I think Ohio State I would describe as vulnerable when she's not, but when she has a case to be the best player on the floor for Ohio State, the Buckeyes are really dangerous.
Yep.
And the same can be said for Hannah Stuelke at Iowa. Like, of course, Hannah Stuelke never has an argument for being the best player on the
Right.
floor for Iowa, but when she has an argument to be the second best player on the floor, period, Iowa's like virtually impossible to beat. It's just a matter of if we get that. And I think
Yep.
we saw Ohio State at times this year when that was true, pointing to the first Iowa game
Yep.
in particular, that they can beat just about anybody in the country. And I will bet on that being the case, and go with the Buckeyes to make the Final Four.
And you know what you're getting from the guard position. That's the other part of that equation, right? JC Sheldon's going to be there. You know what she's going to give you. Right. The question is, do you get the second star, the second player who can go win you a game? Cody McMahon can be that player, has been that player at points this season. The other thing I'll throw in for UConn too is that, I mean, you can make a case for a bunch of different players in this region.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe one on each of the top 4 seeds, but Paige Beckers might be the best. In any game, Paige Beckers can obviously be the best player on the floor. So can Juju Watkins. So can the Ohio State players. So can Elizabeth Kitley. You know, you can go down the list, Georgia Moore, but they do have that player with the ball in her hands who can, and you could talk yourself into any of these teams, but that was part of it for me as well, is in a region with so much firepower at the top from an individual standpoint.
Yeah.
Something about me just wants to pick Paige Beckers to be the one to come out of that region.
What if I told you 3 years ago that there would be like 5 guards in the country that are just considered that are that are just considered, maybe like straight up, that are considered better than Paige Beckers,
or at least a bigger deal.
Yeah. Or at least a bigger deal. Yeah.
Never in a million years.
Never in a million years. My Final Fours on the women's side: South Carolina, Stanford, Iowa, Ohio State. Josh's women's Final Fours:
South Carolina, Stanford, Iowa, UConn.
My Final Four on the men's side: UConn, Houston, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Josh's:
Iowa State, Kentucky, UNC, Purdue.
There you go. Do you want to give a national champion prediction real quick? All right. We'll start on the women's side. Who you got?
South Carolina.
Yep.
All right. This is the reverse of my theory. After what happened last season, this team's not going to let it happen again. I've got Iowa being the team to face them, just because I think that's one step too far for UConn. But I trust Dawn Staley. I trust this team. There is an added motivation that you can somehow find after coming so close, but then also having last season end the way it did. Give me the best team in the country.
The beauty of South Carolina, and I'll foreshadow a little bit here, but the beauty of UConn is that everybody else that we talk about as the best teams in the country, as the potential best teams in the country, all of them are spearheaded by one player that is clearly better than everybody else on their team. That is clearly the most important player on their team. And there are answers to those questions for South Carolina and for UConn, but
it's different.
You get a lot of games where all 5 starters for both of those teams, so somewhere between 11 and 14 points. And then you get somebody coming off the bench that is doing their thing. That scores 8 to 10, and another guy with 6. And it just, you look up and none of them absolutely destroyed you, but they all hurt you. And they just win without anybody doing anything spectacular because they all are just really, really high quality basketball players. I think that's the case with both teams. And for South Carolina, the reason that at the end of the day, there are so many things you have to deal with when it comes to that team, that it feels like it's going to be hard for them to overcome. And to be honest with you, greatness is cool. And that South Carolina team would, in a year where there's so much attention on the women's game for so many reasons, and there are so many household names on the women's side this year. A lot of them are not at South Carolina, but there's this team, this cloud over everybody else, over Juju Watkins, over Caitlin Clark, that if they're gonna get to individual greatness, team greatness, they're gonna have to go through this team that is just an absolute brick wall. And it would be cool to look up and see South Carolina, even in this year, where the storylines are in a lot of ways not that this team is 31-0 heading into the tournament.
Yep.
That they just win 6 games, 37-0 national champion. I think that would be a cool juxtaposition to some of the incredible individual performances that we've seen this year.
Absolutely. Well said.
Men's side, what you got?
Here we go. North
Are you gonna do it?
North Carolina over Iowa State, Purdue
Okay.
over Kentucky, Purdue over North Carolina.
I'm so into that. I'm so jealous that you get to pick Purdue to win the national championship.
I said this from day one.
You did.
I'm dying with my theories this year. This one also being that I think there's real value in getting humbled the way they did last season, just like Virginia. To me, Matt Painter is one of the coaches with the culture he's created that can actually handle this. And you've seen a lot of similarities in the way that he has addressed it to the way Tony Bennett did, the way they handled it and said, it was embarrassing. It happened. We got to move forward. We got to get better from it. They are a much better team than last season. They are more equipped. And ultimately, I still believe UConn is the best team in the country, but Purdue is the team that is the most difficult to beat. The problem is they beat themselves sometimes. And they did it in the Big Ten tournament. But if they can just keep the turnovers down, hit enough threes, the things they have control over give them more control than any other team in the country. And I just think there's something about this that, to me, it's not an accident. Virginia was able to bounce back. It's not an accident. Purdue is going to be able to bounce back and get this done. I don't have any other specific logic other than, they do have the best player in the country. Obviously, it's not a guard, but the guard, Braden Smith, has been good enough this season. He's been great.
He's been great.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Good enough, meaning you have the kind of guard that can lead you to a national championship.
Sure.
Yeah. Still have some concerns about the decision-making at times, but he has been fantastic, generally speaking. They've got all the pieces. I really do think they're a much improved team. They are more built to win in this kind of setup. And ultimately, that's what this is about. And like I said before, I find it interesting if everybody's leaning toward UConn based on the fact that UConn just steamrolled through a Big East that they didn't really have to face the best teams in the conference, because they didn't do that last season. To your point earlier, that there just is not a lot to actually take from winning conference tournaments.
I'm not picking UConn because they won the Big East tournament.
Yeah, no.
Just for what it's worth.
Yeah. But just generally, I think there's a lot of people hopping on UConn right now because of what they're doing. That's not the reason to. And I'm sure you're going to lay out your reasons why right here.
Guard play, shot making, elite big man. They got 3 guys coming off their bench that would start on basically every other Power 5 team in the country. Maybe not every single one.
Their depth is laughable. It's laughable. Yeah.
Right. Like it's not 5 guys that are scoring 10 to 14 points. It is 8 guys that are scoring 10 to 15 points per game. It's Donovan Clingan, and you saw in the Big East, in the Big East final, that he still is that guy that sometimes you just can't stop him. I think it's interesting the way like he's just a part of this train that is UConn, not necessarily like clearly the first car in this train that is UConn. I think it's interesting just kind of how he's talked about, not in a negative way. It's just
Mhm.
like he's much more just a part of this awesome
Right.
team than I thought he might be.
Yeah,
Heading into the
he has not
season.
become the second piece behind Zach Edey or something where we're talking
Right.
about him kind of
Right.
outside the context of UConn for
Right.
sure. Yeah.
But 22-16 is insane. He was incredible in the Big East championship game. Tristan Newton is that guard, is the
Yep.
guard that you need. Cam Spencer and Alex Caravan, just what they do at the wing position is just so much to handle. You have a guy in Stephon Castle that you can put on any best player in the country that is a wing and have him be an issue. And then we haven't even gotten to the three guys that come off the bench. So I am, if I can't come up with a reason other than they won last year to not pick them to win the national championship, then I'm going to pick them to win the national championship. It's not like it's never been done before.
Correct.
And there's nothing about there's nothing that this team is missing that last year's team that is so different from what last year's team had that I can that I can point to that and say that right there is why they're not going to win the national championship. So as a result, I will pick them to win the national championship.
The only thing I can think of is they don't have an Andre Jackson type player. How
Sure.
important is that is definitely up for conversation because right, they added Cam Spencer.
Right.
And and you added the freshman to then also replace Jordan Hawkins, who you lost. I'm right there with you. They check every box. The other thing I will say, and I've been thinking about this, if there is a coach capable of getting a team in a mindset to somehow actually forget that they're the defending national champions and start from day one with the mindset of we have accomplished nothing and we are entitled to nothing, it is Dan Hurley.
Yeah.
He is wired different in a very good way that lends itself to being the hunted team. And you saw that with what they just did this season. That is the one thing I will give them is if I am a defending national champion and you could give me any coach in the country to then lead my team next season, no hesitation. Dan Hurley's the guy I want. And they have that.
There it is. Brackets, both sides. It all starts Tuesday with playing games, then the holy grail of college basketball days starting on Thursday. Even though, Josh, there's a secret. Even though like the round of 32 might just be even better.
Oh, for sure.
Might just be even better. But it's going to be a blast. And there we go. You got anything else?
I think we've been here long enough.
I think
Time
you're
to
right.
play some March Madness basketball.
That's the Under 8 pod in 53 minutes and 42 seconds. A reminder, the schedule for the tournament, Friday night, Sunday night, Monday night. That's how we're rocking to get as much coverage of both the men's and women's side as we possibly can. So we will see you again on Friday evening to talk about the first couple of days of the NCAA tournament. Until then, be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your shows. Follow the Under 8 Pod on Twitter. Subscribe on YouTube. Let's go dancing, and we'll see you again on Friday.